Hi, and welcome to our next affiliate licensee orientation session. The topic today is an introduction to the SETA QCTO accreditation process. My name is Ken Annandale, and I'm going to take you through it, giving you a little bit of insight into the processes that you can expect should you decide to become SETA accredited. Penny Jones and I started INTRA-SAFE some 10 years ago with the primary objective of equipping trainers to do their own in-house and or commercial health and safety training. INTRA-SAFE is a South African company, and we publish health and safety trainers material that is SAQAish CPD accredited, customizable, cost-effective, and very convenient to use. It allows you to do your own legal compliance training with material that is content-rich. Some of our courses are unit standard aligned, and it allows you to adapt the training material to address your own internal risk profile. We're publishers of more than a dozen health and safety trainers kits, which come with Facilitator guide, learner guide, PowerPoints, course material, certificate, and so forth. And you then get on with the process of adapting it to meet your own specific risk profile or that of your learners. I'm also the author and publisher of a number of management books, and one of the latest ones is the 1-Minute Safety Manager, which has been endorsed by Niels Nortkeer, the Chief Executive Officer of Salosh. The book is available from our website or from Bargain Books. All you need to do is ask for the 1-Minute Safety Manager. I've been privileged to be a speaker for almost 30 years and have spoken at countless conferences across the country and beyond the borders of South Africa. And it's allowed me to get a really good insight into occupational health and safety and all its various facets. What I do want to say right now is that INTRA-SAFE are not SETA accreditation specialists. And for you to get the best service, we can make a couple of recommendations, but we're going to recommend that you actually call a specialist. Everything I say in this presentation, I'm going to suggest that you weigh it up with the relevant bodies, you ask them questions, you do your research, and you make sure that that which I'm telling you now is still up to date, because things might have changed, and I might have the picture a little skewed. So it's over to you when it comes to your own research. I want to start off by saying this, that the reason we do health and safety training is to prevent people from being injured or diseased or getting or dying, becoming disabled, and so forth. We want to protect them. We want to prepare them for the eventualities if something should happen within the work environment. And we want to make sure that the incident rate in South Africa comes down. Now, the reason for doing health and safety training is not for NQF credits or legal compliance or getting SDL rebates, skills development levy rebates, or even BEE scorecard points. Those are not the reasons. The reasons are people. People who live with the consequences as a result of the actions of others, or maybe their own action. That is why we do health and safety training, so that people are prepared and capable and competent and able to look after themselves and others in the workplace and at home. Now, to underpin that point, the International Labour Organization says of the something like almost 2.5 million deaths per annum, 2 million are from occupational diseases. Now, you might say, well, that means there's only 300,000 deaths from safety incidents. Yes, absolutely. According to their statistics, the majority of people die as a result of occupational diseases. I recently made a video, an orientation session, that talks about making the training material, the training courses, risk-specific. And it speaks to the fact that every single organization has its own specific, unique risk profile and risk DNA. And that needs to be embedded in the culture, in the systems, into the training, and so forth. And if your training is not risk-specific, it probably won't meet the mark. So let's get on to the topic itself. An introduction to SETA QCTO accreditation. And you as an occupational health and safety training provider say, I would like to become accredited. So here we go. The first question I would say is, do you speak SAQAish? You might go, what is SAQAish? Well, it's the language of SAQA. Ndifunda isiXhosa. In other words, I'm learning to speak isiXhosa. And it's taken me some time, but one day I'll be able to speak the language fluently. And exactly the same with SAQAish. SAQAish is a language on its own, filled with all kinds of terms and acronyms, and sometimes misunderstood and sometimes rather incoherent statements, terminology, references, and its own lexicon. For those of you that have never heard of SAQA, the South African Qualifications Authority, it is a statutory body that was established by the South African government to address the question of a skills shortage in South Africa. By way of a little background, it started off back in 1999 when it replaced the old industry training boards. So in 1995 at least, the SAQA Act was enacted. That was followed in 98 with the Skills Development Act, where they established the SETAs, the Sector Education and Training Authorities. 99, the Skills Development Levy, where employers would have to contribute towards the training of their own staff. In 2008, the NQF Act was enacted, and that replaced the old SAQA Act. Now, more recently, in 2010, an organization, a QAB, was established called the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, or the QCTO. That isn't an act, but it was established then. And I just want to say to you that things change and will change and are changing. So we strongly advise people to stay abreast of what the changes are and what's coming. So, lesson 1 in SAQAish. Get ready for an overload of information and acronyms. When you first hear the language spoken, you wonder where these people come from. Are they from another planet? And it is riddled with confusing, sometimes contradictory, really, really strange and unusual acronyms. And in the initial stages, it is a matter of you're going to have to apply yourself. When learning isiXhosa, I had to go to lessons, and the young lady Babawa, who was my teacher, is my teacher, she was able to take me through the processes, slowly but surely, holding my hand, explaining every single step of the way, every word, every term, right down to the culture of the isiXhosa people. So when the NQF Act was established, they had a primary focus, and you can almost say that there's two groups here: short courses and what I will call medium and long-term courses. Short courses are the typical 1, 2, and 3 day courses that we run under health and safety headings, and there's probably over 160 headings that we can talk about. But the NQF Act targeted predominantly the following: GET, which is General Education and Training, and ABIT, Adult Basic Education and Training and Schooling, up to grade 10. Then the FET, those colleges which allowed for further education and training, and the TVET colleges, the technical and vocational education and training colleges, and that's for apprentice training and so forth, and other skills training, which is more career orientated. And then of course we have the Department of Higher Education, or the HET, and the HET would cover colleges and universities as well. So that was the target group. What wasn't the target group were the short courses that we're involved with. So short courses weren't the target. And still to this day, there is a great deal of confusion about this, such as these health and safety training courses, firefighting, HEYA, investigation, health and safety representative, courses like how to teach a person to do their work, as an example. Somebody who needs to lift a drum doesn't need to go on a 1 or 2 or 3 day SAQA, SETA, NQF accredited course with all its convoluted processes. They just need to know how to do the job. And that, in terms of the law, is a requirement. Short courses often encompass legal compliance or mandatory courses, which one has to do by law. Health and safety rep training is an example of that. Or basic workplace skills, housekeeping, stacking, storage, and things of that nature. And it wasn't aimed at toolbox talks or promotions or awareness days and things like that. So that was not the focus of the NQF Act. But for some reason, we've now been dragged kicking and screaming into that arena. Originally, there was something like 23 SETAs, then it was brought out to 21. Now there's talk of them having 15 SETAs. And these SETAs would then allow people to cluster under a given SETA that would address their industry or their activity or their occupation. Give you an example. Occupational health and safety has, for some reason, been lumped under health and welfare SETA. Now, if you think of it logically, health and safety is quite different to psychology, psychiatry. It's quite different to being a paramedic. It's different to being a doctor or a chemist or a pharmacist. It's quite different to being a laboratory technician, somebody that would fall under the health and welfare SETA. So if you think health and you think welfare, social workers and people like that, where does safety and hygiene, occupational hygiene and occupational health fit into that? It's a really, really strange disconnect, but it is what it is and we live with it. However, you will see or hear that I talk about not going to the health and welfare SETA for your accreditation. More about that just now. I've already mentioned the NQF and the QCTO. Now, it is important to know that the NQF operate with the basis of unit standards, and the QCTO operate on the basis of qualifications, part and full qualifications. So separate in your mind these two different things. One is unit standards and the other one is qualifications. Now, typically unit standards could be short courses, could be the 1, 2, 3 day short courses, but the qualifications would inevitably be much longer and they would make up a qualification such as a diploma or a degree. So now you've probably heard some terms that you've not heard before or have heard but not familiar with. So let's run through them very quickly. SAQA, the South African Qualifications Authority. NQF, National Qualifications Framework. QCTO, the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations. SETA, the Sectoral Educational Training Authority. DOL is the Department of Labor. DHET is the Department of Higher Education and Training. And a new one, SAQAish. SAQAish is the South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. And you'll see shortly how I integrate that into the accreditation process. Now, talking about accreditation, people frequently get these words mixed up. And they talk about an accredited company, an accredited course, and so forth. But in many instances, people don't understand the terminology, and it took me some time to get my head around it. Then we have approval. Approval by the Department of Labor, or certification. People talk about compliance, and not sure about that and how that fits into, or registrations and alignment and things of that nature. So let me help you out and I'll give you a quick explanation of those different words. The first one is accreditation. This is accreditation of training providers, not courses, and not facilitators, assessors, and moderators. This is accreditation of a training provider who gets a number and a certificate saying that they may, as an organization, offer training courses that are accredited. Then we have accreditation of training providers and training courses by SAQAish for CPD point purposes. We'll come back to that. The next word was the word approval, and this is approval of training providers and their training material by the Department of Labor, the DOL. The following word is certification, and that is certification of our intra-affiliate licensee program, or the certification of trainers who are using our training material. That's a commercial certification, which guarantees that this material is not plagiarized and also entails certain aspects of copyright. Then I spoke of the word compliance, and this is compliance where the law mandates that training of employees must be done, such as the health and safety training, health and safety representative training. Then the word registration comes up, and this is registration of competent learners on the National Learner Records database, or the registration of accredited training providers by the Department of Higher Education and Training. And then alignment. This is alignment of training material for accreditation purposes, but we often also speak about it being or needing to be risk aligned. In other words, taking the risk profile and building that into the training program. You're going to come across all kinds of contradictions here. And one of the contradictions is they've got two different types of facilitators. For instance, the NQF SDF, the Skills Development Facilitator, is nothing more than an administrator or a manager who looks after the workplace skills program or plan and submits the reports and submits the claims and things. They call them a facilitator. A skills development facilitator, as opposed to SAQA unit standard, where the facilitator is the trainer, like one would go on a train the trainer course or an instructor. Now, I want to point out for the first time over here that SAQA unit standards have numbers. And for instance, this one over here, the facilitator program run by the ETDP SETA, is unit standard number 117871. 117871 sounds like a telephone number. But what is so important about this, it is a reference back to a unit standard that has been established. But the crazy thing about it is that people now no longer say train the trainer program, they will say, I did 117871, as if the world knows what 117871 is or was, and it's very confusing to those who are not familiar with the process, and confusing to the facilitators and assessors and moderators themselves. So I urge people, don't talk in numbers, tell me what it is. It's a train the trainer, instructor, facilitator course, training people so that they can run training programs. Make sense? So of our more than dozen training programs, you or your trainer can run these courses. And we said 8 of them are already unit standard aligned, more to come. And of course, some of these courses are just pure legal compliance courses, where 1 or 2 of them, 2 in fact, are specified in terms of the Act where accreditation must be proven. So let's take it to the next step. Let's have a look at a couple of elements that you and I need to be very aware of. The first one is, how does the employer set up this entire process, and why would they want accreditation? Now, this is not the employer who wants to be accredited. This is an employer who says, are you accredited? And the process is simple. The first thing they do is they determine which SETA they fall under. Then, based on the salaries that are paid, I believe it's something like R500,000 a year, they pay 1% of that salary bill in the form of an SDL. This is not an SDF, this is an SDL, a Skills Development Levy to SARS, the South African Revenue Service. SARS then takes the money and allocates it to one of the 21 different SETAs. They then have funds that they can operate with. The employer then appoints the SDF, remember the Skills Development Facilitator, who develops the WSP, amongst other things, the Workplace Skills Program or Plan. Then the SDF, or the employer, selects the appropriate training provider, and in the process, we call it due diligence, determines whether that provider is able to provide appropriate training. I'm going to urge you to, and the employer should, scrutinize whether the provider is going to provide risk-adapted, risk-aligned, risk-specific training, or just a generic one-size-fits-all, and just plug in people wherever they can. These providers should have a relationship with the employer and should base everything on the risk profile of the organization. Now, remember the video that we made? Strongly urge you to go back and watch that video and share that with people in the organization. Then once they do that, this is the employer or the SDF and the skills provider. They must agree on the content, the methodology, the facilitator, the assessor, the moderator, everything that is required to get this process done. Because if they don't have the necessary agreements in place, it often fails. They then release their staff for training, and those staff either on-site or maybe send them out. Remember I mentioned going out, you're normally going to get a generic course which is not risk-specific. The learner goes off, goes through the process, and then comes back. And when I say goes through the process, we'll talk about that later. But in the process, for every credit that the course carries, the learner must do 10 notional hours back in the workplace under the mentorship of somebody who knows that specific task or skill. So if it's a 2-credit course, like a health and safety rep course, that means they would spend a further 20 hours in the workplace working under the mentorship of this person. Also doing the POE, which is the portfolio of evidence. More about that just now. Then all the reports go through, the entire verification cycle is completed, and the SDF, the Skills Development Administrator, processes the claims. So that's the how, setting it up, and then the why. Well, there's money to be gained back. Of that 1% of the 500,000 Rand on the salary bill, the employer is able to get grants, and there are a variety of grants that they can get, but they could get as much as 20% of that 1% back. For some, it's a lot. For others, it's not even worth it. Then, another reason why the employer would want accreditation is to prove that their employees are developing their skills. And that, obviously, is excellent for the employer, the employee, and the country. But I want to point out right now that the employer does not benefit from mandated training on their BEE scorecard. That's a very important point. A little bit more about that in a moment. Okay, now here's something that most people are not familiar with. Most employers are not familiar with the fact that they can claim from the SETA or from SARS, they can claim for training that was not accredited or not unit standard aligned. So let me just quickly touch on it here. It says here that the SDL Act, Skills Development Levy Act, provides for the recovery of a levy payment based on submission of the Workplace Skills Program, the WSP, and the names of the SDF, that administrator. So that's the way one would normally do it. And there's a lot more information on that. I'm not going to cover it here. But the employer can claim, even if not using an accredited provider or an NQF aligned course. That's very important. Most people don't know that. And then there's the issue of the BEE points for mandatory training. If the law says training has to take place, then that does not and should not reflect on the BEE scorecard or statements and reports. The question that most people would then ask, they would ask it of a service provider or a training facilitator. They would ask the question, are you accredited? And then wait for an answer. It's a question that most people fear. The skills, the training provider, in the instance of not being accredited, they cringe when they hear this word, because so often the employer or the SDF have no clue as to what they're asking. They don't know. They just go, well, is it accredited? It's almost like saying, do you have a driver's license? And instead of saying, do you have a valid driver's license? Do you have a registered driver's license? Do you have a driver's license with no criminal record? Do you have a driver's license for this classification of vehicle? Do you have a driver's license that is still valid? They just ask, is it accredited? And the questions that they should be asking would include some of these. The employer or the SDF should ask, will the course be risk aligned? Will it be specific to our risks? And if the answer is no, I would caution you as to whether or not you're going to use that person or the provider. Ask them, demand of them that they make it risk specific. Provide them with the profile of the risks and then say, build it into the training program. The next question that they should ask is, which unit standards will you be presenting? For instance, health and safety representatives, we spend a huge amount of time on these health and safety representatives, and employers don't know which unit standard. They're a number, they're more than one, and whether it will actually then be risk specific, and whether those unit standards are still current, and how many credits they will get from those unit standards, and then whether the facilitator, the assessor, and the moderator is registered against those unit standards. That's a critical one. And are the facilitators, assessors, and moderators competent? Have they been found competent? Those of you that are going for accreditation will hear that they talk a lot about your assessors. Do you have assessors? And are they trained? And facilitators and assessors and moderators would normally go to the ETD, would have to go to the ETDPC to get these qualifications, or at least these attend the courses. But you know that the SETAs never ask for your facilitators, or if they do, it's almost so rare. I have almost never heard of a SETA asking, is your facilitator a subject matter specialist? Are they experienced? Do they know what they're talking about? Are they registered? Are they registered against those unit standards? They might very well be registered against other unit standards, but this unit standard that we're doing now, are they registered against that? And has the subject matter specialist, has he or she recently been involved in training? Or are they just, may I say this, Johnny come latelys? And the question that they should ask is, when does the accreditation end? And when does this person's registration end? And will you be reapplying? And then the final question, of many more, I'm sure, would be, so these certificates you're going to issue us, what type? Are they certificates of attendance, certificates of compliance, certificates of participation, or in terms of the NQF Act, is it going to be a certificate of competency? And when do we actually get to see the certificate? Because folks, sometimes it could take 6 to 8 months before the certificates arrive. And as I've just used the example of a health and safety representative, the employer needs the certificate next week to prove that they've trained the people. Can't wait for 6 to 8 weeks. So in any case, that's some of the challenges that we're faced with, but we can overcome them. The big thing that I say to employers is make sure that the training is risk unique, risk specific, risk adapted. Every organization has a risk profile, and that risk profile is determined by a process called HEYA, Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. We've got an excellent course on that, course material available. You can use that to train up your risk analysis team or your risk assessment team, and then the training provider would embed the profile and that information into the training course. Now, you might be a training provider wanting to get SETA accreditation. The question would be why? Well, in most instances, it's for marketing. It opens doors. It's as simple as that. If a person says, are you accredited? You say, yes, I have accreditation. It's market acceptance, it's market recognition. The learner that's going to be going on the training program knows that they will, once they're finished, be able to claim or acquire or accumulate those credits. There's more and more buyer pressure from people who don't know what they need, asking, is there accreditation? Is it accreditation? Assuming that this is the golden ticket, but it's not. And you will see and hear in other training modules that I do, is that it's far from adequate sometimes. Okay, the SETA system is great for colleges and universities, but these 1, 2, and 3 day programs and courses, very difficult. It's a big disconnect, but at least we can overcome it. Those that do overcome it then have a competitive edge, and they will stand head and shoulders above those that don't have it. Now, the SETA system, one of the things I like about it is that they're very strong in the quality management system to ensure that the quality processes behind the scenes are in place. The right documentation, the right course material, the right people, the right durations, following the course from the process from beginning right to the end. And then, of course, you may want to get SETA accreditation because the law says you must. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. In fact, what the law says is you don't have to, other than 2 or 3 instances. The law says you don't have to have accreditation. Bear that in mind. And then, of course, lastly, it's a question of professional standing. Those of you that want to develop your own careers, it is obviously a benefit of being accredited or having attended all these training programs. Now, you can check me out on this, and please do. Accreditation is not a legal requirement. It's not required by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, except for those 2 or 3 instances that I spoke of. In the General Safety Regulations, it says that the first aider must be approved, and more recently, the Chief Inspector says, and accredited. In the Driven Machinery Regulations, operator training such as forklift and cranes and people like that have to attend an approved training program, approved by the Department of Labor. And then under the Construction Regulations, certain working at heights and certainly fall arrest and fall protection training must be done by a person who is accredited and competent so that the learner can become competent as well. Okay, so enough of that. What you can do, though, is that you can present 11 of our 13 training programs right now, tomorrow, starting tomorrow. If you have the subject matter knowledge and you're comfortable as a trainer, you can run 11 of these training programs. But the 2, of course, we mentioned 4-track, which is the commercial name for the Working at Heights program, and the first track. We'll come back to that in a moment. So there you are. You may be a health and safety consultant and you're saying, I would like to get into health and safety training. Or you might already be a training manager, officer, facilitator, instructor, and said, I would like to extend my skills, my competency, and the range of training programs that I want to present. And you have a number of questions. And the typical question is, where do I go? Who do I speak to? Well, hopefully this video will start you on the journey and give you a little bit of information. Which SETA do I go to? Very good question. I'm going to tell you quite simply, in my personal opinion, and I may very well be mistaken, go for the easiest one. Don't go for the most difficult one. Do that, and you get the easy one, you get accreditation, and then you can get what is called an extension of scope on your training programs. What must I do? How must I go? Well, there's a process. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of phased steps that you can take once you come towards the end of this video. Who do I speak to? Well, fortunately, there are people out there that will be able to assist you, and certainly Penny and I will be able to help you as far as we can. If we can't help you, we'll turn you and show you to people that can help you. And then, of course, how and how much? That's a question, obviously, from an accreditation point of view. There are costs involved. And then the final one is why. Do you really want this? Do you want to have to go through all of this stuff so you can become a SETA accredited or QCTO accredited training provider? And my recommendation to you is yes, yes, because it's going to open doors for you. Okay, let's start with the phases. Phase one is before you do anything too radical. If you're a training provider, if you're somebody that wants to make money from training, get up and running as soon as possible. I said there's 11 of the 13 training programs which you can use tomorrow without accreditation. That will allow you to generate cash flow, if you're an in-house trainer with a company or a department, where you can actually generate savings to your budget, which you can then reapply to the acquisition of training materials such as the range that we've got. It allows you to run non-credit bearing, legal compliance SAQAish short courses, which are then completely acceptable in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. And if anybody says anything other than that, ask them to show it to you in writing. It's a typical marketing ploy where people say, it's got to be accredited. It doesn't have to be accredited, but it is important. But more importantly is make sure that all the courses that you run or you present are risk adapted to meet the legal requirements and the risk profile as we spoke of. And importantly, you can then customize our training material with your logo, your photos, your videos, and things like that, your safe work procedures, etc., etc., etc. Step two is a research phase. Now, you don't have to spend money for this. You can Google, you can get information, you can ask us, I can send you documents. I have a whole library of information. I can send you checklists of what to do and where to go that I've generated for our clients. And that's not going to cost you. We don't charge for that. So what we are going to suggest is that you do your research and you do it thoroughly. Make sure that you know what you're talking about. Get all the documentation, file it properly, administrate the process properly, and then identify who's going to do the training, who's going to do the assessment, and who's going to be the moderator. Now, I mentioned this now and possibly later, is that the facilitator, assessor, and moderator are three different people. The facilitator is the trainer. The assessor is like the teacher who checks up to see whether the training was done properly, or the principal, and then the moderator is the Department of Education to come and see that the schooling system works properly. Now, those three steps, those three people, facilitator, assessor, and moderator, there's the registration for them, as we mentioned, there's the training for them, and so forth. But it is a long-winded process, and there's hoops and hurdles that you're going to have to overcome. So we do recommend that to get up and running quickly, that you should maybe use a SETA accreditation specialist. We have a number of people that we've dealt with in the past who have delivered amazing service at a cost. Remember, this is all business, and they're in it for profit. But whoever you select, please, whoever you select, there have been so many stories of organizations and individuals being stung by con artists and scam artists who charge them money and then they don't get what was promised. So check their credentials, make sure that, I've seen people that regard themselves as accreditation specialists and they don't even have a website. They operate with a Gmail address, and more recently I saw somebody who said, once you paid your money, I'll give you my telephone number. Come on, that's really ridiculous. So don't fall for that at all. Phase three is an interesting one. So you're now setting yourself up so that you can run your own training programs, you're getting yourself together, you're doing your research, but in the meantime, because our training programs, all of our training kits are SAQAish CPD accredited, you can become a member of SAQAish. And as a result of that, you can request and apply for accreditation, CPD accreditation for your training. Now, CPD points are a specific requirement of SAQAish member, sort of their development program. However, what you can legitimately say and put on your website and put on your certificates, that this course has X amount of SAQAish points, CPD points. And if somebody says, are you accredited? You can truthfully say, I am accredited by SAQAish, or this course is accredited by SAQAish. However, we are in the process of getting SETA and or QCTO accreditation. Now let's take a look at phase 4. This is where you're making the application. Now folks, you need to be patient here. This is sometimes a long-winded process, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 2, 3, 4 years. And for that reason, I say, find yourself a SETA accreditation specialist. The one that we're using for our own accreditation is somebody that has a good reputation, and we'll gladly share her name with you so you can talk to her. But here, this is how it works. So in phase 4, you're going to make a number of financial decisions, operational decisions, administrative decisions, things that you need to go into with your eyes wide open. So the first thing that I suggest you do is find a SETA, the appropriate SETA, and don't go to 3 or 4 SETAs. You only get accreditation from one. If you want to be with other SETAs, you get this thing called the extension of scope. And then just apply for 1 or 2 unit standards. Don't make it convoluted. Go to the easiest SETA you can go to. But do not go to the health and welfare SETA at this stage. You see, they require that you have at least 2 unit standards per course. And they also require that one director of the service provider or the training provider has at least 120 credits, which is more than a diploma and probably a university degree. And remember what I said. If you're a training manager, officer, facilitator, provider, you probably don't have a degree. It's unlikely. It's fantastic if you do, and well done for that. So keep it simple. Really keep it simple. And then bear in mind that in future, QCTO will not be recognizing NQF unit standards anymore. They've moved away from that, and they're only focusing on part and full qualifications. So there's some confusion over there, and it takes time for these processes to work. Now, I know that there's going to be change. I've attended a number of workshops, and I've been involved with various organizations that are looking at this entire process. Remember, I spoke to you about the SETA, the SAQAish accreditation. I'm honored to actually serve on the SAQAish SHASTAC, which is the SAQAish Health and Safety Training Advisory Committee. And we're addressing QCTO, Department of Labor, Department of Higher Education, and so forth. We're addressing them on all these issues. So I know that there's change in the near future. But what I do want to say to you is because of the process, and because it's slow, and because we're dealing with somewhat bureaucratic processes which are quite convoluted and sometimes very old-fashioned, be patient, be persistent, don't give up, and please be polite. I've heard of service providers being so rude to SETA staff, and it's not deserved. It's really not deserved. It doesn't become that service provider at all. And in fact, I think that animosity would slow down your process. Just be nice. Be nice. So, okay. I mentioned that it's rather old and convoluted. And it's sometimes like traveling on an ox wagon. And the processes are crazy. You know, if the Department of Home Affairs can be so quick with passports, why can't we get accreditation a lot quicker than that? Well, maybe that's not a good example. But nevertheless, there is a thing called the verification cycle. And it's important to know that the wheel turns very slowly here. So a course that you start in January, you may only receive the certificates in August, September, October. It's a slow-moving mechanism. If you're the presenter of the course, know that you're going to have to follow through every single step of the way. If you're the recipient of the course as a learner, know that there are steps, and I'll cover them in a moment, that you're going to have to follow. And if you're the employer sending your employees for training, know this, that wheel turns slowly, and sometimes it breaks. So there we go. I said be persistent, be patient, and please be polite. So here we go. This is what I refer to as the verification cycle. The first component is the facilitation process. And the facilitation is where the instructor would be standing up in front of the class. So before the learner can actually qualify to come on course, you, the training provider or the employer, must determine whether they are qualified to attend. I mean, what do you mean? Well, every single unit standard has a minimum qualification of people that can come on the course. Now, that's very interesting. So people have been sent on courses which, according to the unit standard, they're not allowed to be sent on. Therefore, they might not get their credits. More on that at a later stage. It's a very interesting debate, that one. Then, during the training process, there are some assessments that take place. They fall under the categories of formative assessments. It's gauging whether the person is learning and assimilating this information, and summative assessments right at the end, and so forth. There's a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. And once the training has been completed with all its practicals and all the other exercises that take place, then the learner has to go away and complete the POE, portfolio of evidence. This is a requirement. Without a portfolio of evidence, they cannot qualify. They cannot be called competent. Now, that POE must not be done in the class. It has to be done afterwards, after the course. Organizations that are helping people do the POE in the class are actually missing the point, and sometimes, I hesitate to say this, could be breaking the law. It could be fraudulent. So watch out for that. Then the learner goes back into the workplace where a mentor is appointed for them, and that mentor then mentors them through what is regarded as notional hours. And for every credit, let's say health and safety rep is 2 credits, 10 hours per credit, that means it's a day in the classroom or 2 days in the classroom or in the training room, and then a further 20 hours in the workplace under mentorship before the assessment can be done. Now, at that stage, the portfolio of evidence is completed, remember it's after hours, and then brought back to and provided back to the training provider, who then takes it and readies it for the next stage of the verification cycle. This is the assessment and the moderation process. So the assessor would take the portfolios of evidence, maybe take a sample group, have a look at it to determine whether the facilitator did a good job. Now I have no problem with that. I think it's a very logical thing to do, and it's part of the quality management system. The assessor then writes a report and then declares whether the person was or was not sufficiently trained, adequately trained, and if not, they have to be retrained. Now, the training provider must then appoint an independent moderator who then checks on both the facilitator and the assessor to determine whether the entire process was completed. I think that's, in terms of a 1, 2, 3 day course, is kind of unnecessary, but nevertheless, it is what it is, and that's the way, if you're going to be SETA accredited, that's the way you're going to have to do it. So the moderator then moderates the entire process, and at that stage, a request is sent to the SETA by the service provider. And the service provider then gets a date from the SETA, and they come and do what is called verification. So it's essentially the 4th step, and that should be in red. I should have bolded that in red. And after the verification, the SETA issues a statement of results, and that is then when the service provider is able to determine that these learners are competent, and then register them on the National Learner Records database, which is done online. And only at that stage do the learners, and certainly the service providers, receive the I am competent learner certificates. They declare them competent or not yet competent. But that's what I said to you could be 6 months after the training session or the facilitation has taken place before the certificate is issued. It's a process, and that process is convoluted. And then all the documentation, the records and everything have to be kept for a statutory period of time. And then, and only then, can the client be invoiced. So the service provider will then go through all of these steps before they receive any money for the training that took place. Now, in all fairness, service providers have every right to ask for a deposit, to ask for part payment, to ask for staggered payment or something like that. Because remember, they must pay their facilitator, assessor, and moderator. They've got to pay their printing costs. They've got to pay the location, the venues, the accommodation, transportation, and everything like that. So it is fair to say that the service provider, the training provider, has to be funded and funded equitably. So we say enter into an agreement, and when these payments are being made, as in terms of dates or phases or stages of the training process. Well, folks, I hope this has been a benefit to you. There's so much more that I can share. I don't want to get into too much more detail at this stage. We're already at 45 minutes. And if you have any questions, please focus them or sort of send them to us. Certainly, if you have any comments or any corrections that must take place in this video, please tell me so I can correct them. I'm more than open. I don't know everything. The older I get, the more I realize how little I actually know. And I want to encourage you to take a look at the training material that we've got. You can start generating your own internal training or your own training courses from that. I spend a lot of time with my team developing this training material, and you can contact us either on the website, www.safetytrainingkits.com. Alternatively, you can WhatsApp me on the number here, 082-920-8912, or you can WhatsApp Penny on 082-920-8170, or you can Skype me. I'll provide you with more information. And certainly, I look forward to being of service to your organization. And remember, my little saying at the end of all of these sessions is, play safe and stay safe. Thanks very much.